This is part 2 of the Sally Says project. And the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to create that CSS file that we linked to previously but hadn't actually created. And because I'm being lazy, I'm not going to put it in a folder, although it's best practice to put it in a CSS folder. And I also have to relink the style sheet here so that it's just linking directly to the sheet rather than to a folder and then the sheet. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the table that's going to have the 4 different colors for the Sally Says game. So I'm going to create 2 rows and 2 columns in each cell. So it's going to be a 2 by 2 matrix, and each cell in that matrix is going to have a button. And each button is going to have its own ID to represent the color of the button. So I'm just going to copy paste all of this and then create IDs for red, yellow, green, and blue. And now I'm just seeing to make sure that it actually worked, and the buttons did show up, but the formatting looked pretty funky, so we're going to go ahead and update the formatting so it looks a little cleaner. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to make the cells in the table 300 pixels wide and tall. That makes them wide and tall. The only problem is now our buttons are not filling out the space. So our buttons, as you can see here, are very small. So we need to update that as well. All right, so we're just going to have the table buttons fill up the width and height of the cells. And then we're going to put a little margin on the top of this table so that it's not so squinched up against the play button. I'm just going to put this for table, not the cells. A little too much. All right, that should do it. Now we're just going to color all the different buttons so that they correspond with the colors that we're looking for. So red, yellow, green, blue. There we go. That looks pretty good. Now we're going to link the buttons from the HTML file to the index.js file so that when the user presses the button, it will actually do an action and send information to the program as to what button was actually pressed, red, yellow, green, or blue. And we're also going to create the function color pressed so that when the user presses the button, it actually runs a function. I'm just going to make an alert that sends the message test just to make sure that button works when any of these individual buttons are pressed. And it looks like each one of them is working. Now I'm just going to look up how to pass data with jQuery on the click method. I always like going to Stack Overflow or W3 Schools. This gives a pretty good explanation here. You can memorize all this, but usually it's pretty fast and easy just to Google it. So I definitely recommend Googling it whenever it takes you more than like 2 seconds to remember how to do it. And as you can see here, this is going to take a key value parameter. So we're just going to change it to color and then the value red, yellow, blue, green. And that's how we then use the information later on. So now this is going to allow us to pass along the information red, yellow, blue, green when any of these individual buttons are pressed. And that should be all we need. All right, it looks like it works. And again, here you don't really need to memorize exactly what's going on or how this works. As long as you can just Google it and figure out what to put in, that's all that really matters, especially as you're learning to program. Once you're an expert, then maybe it makes a little bit more sense to dive into all the details in terms of how each of these different functions and events work. But for now, we can just use this event.data.color and the key value parameter color / red to or yellow, blue, green to pass along information to our color pressed function. And now I'm just going to try to think through a little bit how to build out the rest of this program. What we basically want is that when the user presses the color press button, it's going to register that input and it's going to add it to the answer. And then once the user's answer is as long as the prompt, then it's going to check to see if the answer is equal to the pattern. But the key here is we don't want that to happen before. So we just got to rework where we want to put this line of code. There's a few different ways we can do this. There's not necessarily one right answer. I think what might work is taking that if then statement, if answer is equal to pattern, and just putting it in the color pressed function, and only running it once the answer is as long as the pattern. So this should work. And when I think if there's any other way to do this that might be a little easier, let's just go with this one. And we're just going to first test to make sure that the user's answer is the same length as the pattern, because otherwise they definitely won't be equal. And again, just cleaning up some of these different functions. I'm just going to make the answer a global variable just so it's a little easier to use and we don't have to pass along to each of the individual functions. All right, now this should work. So this is going to run every time the user presses one of the buttons. It's going to take in the value that the user pressed and then add it to the answer. Once the answer is the same length as the pattern, we're just going to reset answer to an empty string. And we're going to run the play game function again if the user gets it right. And if they get it wrong, we're going to end the game. So just checking over again to make sure everything looks correct. All right, and we're going to go ahead and see if it works. So far, so good. We're going to add in the button pressing functions in the next part of this project. But for now, we're just making sure that it actually works. I'm just tinkering with some writing here. That actually looks good. we're just going to go ahead and make that table border, and we're going to have the button press feature in this video. So all we're going to do is that when the button is active, so this is a pseudo state, so when the button is in an active pseudo state, we're just going to change the shadow, and we're going to make it look like it moves down 4 pixels like that. So this is just kind of a simple way to make it look like there's a button being pressed here.